Thank you so much for having me. I'm Mada, one of the founders of Branch. A little bit about me. We have an interesting story. So I'm actually, to understand how we scaled our culture, I'll tell you a little bit about our story. But basically, my co-founders and I started by building a photo book printing app called Kindred. We ended up selling it in 2014 and then started Branch. And today, these are not quite updated. We're over 6 billion requests a day. We're the linking infrastructure in a lot of mobile apps. We have over 160 employees, raised over 100 million in funding. So these are some of the apps or mobile brands using us. And we call ourselves basically the linking infrastructure for today's top brands. So let me start. I think to understand how we build culture and how we scale culture, it's important for you to understand our story. So I'm going to start at the very beginning. And this was the logo, the app logo that I designed. I didn't know anything about designing, so I learned how to do it in Photoshop. And this was the first logo I ever built. And basically, it all started with an idea. So I think people talk a lot about how there's two types of startups. There are the startups that fix a problem, the painkillers, and then the startups that are like the nice-to-haves, the vitamins. And ours was definitely, I would say, more on the vitamin side. So we were in business school, I think at the end of the first year, and we wanted to build a company, and we had the summer ahead of us. So we sat in a room for a day, and we came up with all these ideas and came up with the metrics like business school students do about all the ones that were going to be able to be big and all the ones that had a big market size and all the ones that we felt the need. So this idea of Kindred, a photo book printing app. So we felt that we took all our photos on phones, and our parents and grandparents liked still print. So we wanted to bridge that gap and to build something that made it easy for us to send stuff to our parents and grandparents. So these are how the photo books looked. They were fairly cheap. They only costed $5, and you can basically order them from your phone. And it was really interesting. You think you have an idea. So we spent the whole summer building it. Two of my co-founders were technical, so they built the app. I did all the design, and our other co-founder, Mike, did all the printing and the infrastructure and being able to work with the printers. So we're like, OK, cool. We had this idea, and we built it. Amazing. Let's launch it. And we launched it. And we thought that people are going to use it, but obviously no one used it. So this was the number of users we had, because I think, and I've seen this, I think when you're in the very early stages of being an entrepreneur, you don't think that much about how do you generate demand, how do you do marketing. So, but then a few things happened. So Apple featured us in Best New Apps, and then Google Play also featured us in Best Apps of 2013. And that really changed things for us. So from, we had 10 users a day, we were basically now having 5,000 new installs a week. And this was crazy. We really were like, wow, we are a rocket ship. It's going to be incredible. Look at all these users. It was hard for us to keep up to the demand. We're getting 100 to 200 books a day. We were still in school at the time. So it was really cool to have a company that was generating revenue. And we really thought we were onto something. But then something else happened. So if any of you have apps, and if any of you have been featured, you know what happens when the feature ends. People stop finding you. And we went to the trough of despair. We were like, wow, this is really crazy. What do we do now? So we raised money. What else do entrepreneurs do? We went and raised money. So we raised $50,000 from Payer Ventures. And I would say they're awesome investors, and they really believe more in us as founders than I think they did in the idea. So one thing they said is you need some volume. And you need this volume to prove that you actually have a business model. Because our hypothesis was that people are going to come back and buy books over and over again. So we ended up raising the money and buying a lot of installs. So my job became buying installs. So I learned a lot about acquisition on mobile. And then we realized that the ROI was negative. And to cut the story short, we realized we were not a rocket ship, and we ended up phasing the app out, ended up selling the technology to someone else for not a lot of money. When you are a startup and trying to sell technology, if the founders don't go with it, you won't make much of it from it, especially if it's a early stage app. So we felt our choices were limited. Either we were buying installs from Facebook, or we were featured in the app stores, and we wanted to change that. So we knew that this was an industry problem. This was not just a problem that we faced. So we built Branch to basically fix the industry. So we built a linking platform that basically allows apps to do things like social sharing, build user invites, and actually do a better job understanding where their installs are coming from and how their users are engaging across web and app. So the core of our DNA was really building a company from something that we felt incredibly deeply, which was very, very different than Kindred, which was an idea that we had in a room with a board. This was a need that we felt to our core when we were trying to launch and grow our own app. So even from the early days, as you think about culture, we, in some ways, were the customers. And when we sat down and started thinking about culture, it was something that it was a lot more part of our DNA than it had before. So I know many of you who are here starting very early might think, I don't have time to think about culture. I don't have time to define our values. But what I'm here to tell you is that it's actually incredibly important that you do it. And it's incredibly important that you do it early. We did it when we were just the 4 founders in a room. And I remember my co-founders were kind of like, oh, really? But we're behind on this. Half an hour to think about this? I'm like, yes, let's spend the half an hour. And it was one of the most useful exercises we had. Because after that, we ended up raising money. And we started hiring. So when we started hiring, knowing what our values were and the type of people we were looking for was actually incredibly important to help us have a cohesive culture as we grew. So this is our first version of our values that we wrote. We had one intern, one employee, Abby, and she ended up writing them on this board that you can still see it in our office. And they're not exactly the same as the values that we have today. It was we didn't really know what we were doing, but we knew certain things are important to us. We knew, from our days at Kindred, being very customer-focused, we knew that being customer-focused was going to be very important. So our first value is partners first, and that has stayed with us as we grew. But just defining them in the early days, it's not enough. You need to evolve them. So as you start hiring more people, as you start defining yourselves as a startup entity, you'll start understanding more who you are. You'll start noticing that there are certain things that you value in people and certain things that you don't. So the first value exercise was actually very short. We kind of just wrote things down on a piece of paper. But the second one, which was, I would say, about 8 months in, I think we were probably 25 people at the time, was very different. We actually sat on a Saturday in a room for a few hours, actually thinking, who are the best people at Branch? And what do they have that we really value? What do they all have in common? What are things that we as founders strive to be? What are characteristics that we really value? So then we came up with our second version of our values. And we sat with that. And we actually did things like everyone who joins gets a moleskin with Branch on it. So we printed it on the first page of that moleskin. We put them around our office. And we started thinking about them as something that's really a guiding principle and a guiding light to helping us understand how to hire people. And in the early days, we as founders interviewed everyone, because that's what you do when you're early, and you want to make sure that the first people that you hire are really fit. Someone said that the way you should look at employees is they need to be values fit, but culture add. So I really like that. So you're looking for diversity, you're looking for people that are different, but you're looking for people that have the same shared values with you. And interestingly enough, as we grew even more, we realized that these values were not really that comprehensive. And there were certain things that we valued in people that we hadn't put in the early values. One of those things was humility. We realized, having employees that were actually really good, but not very nice to others, and then we realized we had to let some of them go. And we realized that is really a value for us. Humility is a value. So we added that to our values, and we stuck to it. A different one was initiative. We realized that wasn't in our values before, but we really want, the only way we can grow and really not just be a tiny company is if others outside of us take initiative. So we needed to reward that and put that in our values. So we had a third iteration a year later. So I think that the lesson that I'm trying to say here, to tell you here, is that values are important, but don't feel that they're set in stones. There's a core to it that has to stay the same, but your actual values can evolve over time. So define what your values actually mean. And the other thing that's really important is you can't just define values and put them on a wall. If you just do that, then the values don't really matter. And I've heard of companies who do that, and everyone says, this is our values. But then you see people do things that are not core to those values, and nothing happens. So the values should be something that you use to evaluate candidates, to reward them, both candidates and employees, and also in some ways punish them when they really don't live up to those values. So we're very, I guess in a way, data-driven. So we actually came up with a matrix. And we have a matrix that basically says, OK, these are our values. And this is what it means to really suck, to kind of be in the middle, this is the expected, and this is above average. So we didn't just say, oh, these are the values. Go figure out on your own what it means to live up to them. We came up with what it means to live up to them. Every time a new cohort of people starts, I actually give a presentation. And in that presentation, I tell them, hey, these are our values. These are examples of people living up to the values. This is what it means to live up to them. This is what it means to not live up to them. And by the way, here's the matrix where you can read more. And every time a manager comes and says, I want to take this person and I want to promote them, we have a sheet where they have to fill in how, they have to rank them on each value and give examples. When someone is a 4 or a 5, things that they've done to actually show that they really live up to those values. And it's important as you grow, as companies grow, the willingness to change kind of goes down. It's important that even as you grow, you remember to update this. So we're going now through another exercise of slightly updating our values. And they're not actually changing. We're big enough now that we're fairly stable. But we're adding certain nuances to the way we describe what some of these values mean. Transparency means giving feedback, and we're making that a bigger part of transparency. Ownership is important, but ownership also needs to be around with collaboration. So while they're fixed in some ways, they're also a work in progress in others. The other interesting thing that we do, and I think it's also important, is to wave, as you grow and as you get bigger, it's harder for people to know the stories of people exemplifying those values. So one thing that I like doing at Branch is waving the values and the stories that I tell and the spaces you live in. So we do this thing called Branch Talk, which I stole from Stanford. In business school, we had, one person goes in front and gives a talk about themselves. So we do it at Branch where, some of our older employees, I bring them in front of the whole company every 2 or 3 weeks, and I interview them. And I ask them questions about, why did they choose Branch? What are some of their favorite moments of Branch? what are some ways that they exemplified values of Branch? And that's the way the stories get told. And people hear the stories from our early days that maybe now they don't get to experience themselves because they're newer. And the other thing is I also like to, every piece of art has to exemplify or be tied to a value. So when you talk about Partners First, one of our designers painted this painting of trees, and we actually ended up doing a photo mosaic of that painting from logos of our partners. And now that we're bigger, we just did another one from a painting that I painted. And then the painting that you see there, our first app, so the first mobile brand or app that ever used us was an app called Vango, and they were an art app. So I wanted to make sure that the first piece of art that we ever bought from the office was something that we bought from that app. So we were 8 employees at the time, and we all voted. And that was the painting that won. And that's the painting that now sits in our office. We also named our rooms after things that fit with our values. So we have a room named Vango. Failure is important and being failure accepting. So we have all our failed big projects. We have a room called Kindred. We have a room called Branch Exchange over a big project that never made it and failed. The other thing is ownership. Ownership is one of our values. So there's a lot of furniture at Branch that was built by our employees. So this is a bookshelf that my co-founder and some of the other employees built. We have a room called Redwood, where the main table is actually built by 4 of our employees, including one of my co-founders. Fast iteration, we have things that posters around the office. So the Live Remaining Zero was really a poster that I bought in the very early days because it felt like Branch was our last life. We had tried before and failed. And it really kind of makes you think, if this startup is the last one, or this startup, how fast do you move? And the other one are quotes by some of my co-founders that we end up framing and putting on the walls. So just like your product, as you think about values, but also your culture in general, your culture needs feedback and iteration. And this is something that this is, I think, a mistake that I've seen many founders do. Sometimes it's hard to take feedback from your employees as you grow larger. But I think it's really important to do it. And the other thing that's very important is you have to take as much feedback as possible, but you don't have to listen to all of it. You are at the end of the day, it is your company and you're building something. And sometimes, especially at our size, you get very competing pieces of feedback. Everyone has their own opinion, and everyone wants to do something a certain way. But when you see a trend of many people giving you the same feedback over and over again, that means that there maybe is a problem and you need to change. So we take feedback in many ways. We have an anonymous feedback form that everyone can fill, that we send every month, and that we also read. We do an employee engagement survey that's also anonymous. We have founder feedback. We have feedback that we request from employees of their managers. We have skip level feedback where someone's direct reports will actually give feedback to HR or the manager's manager. So the only way that we can make sure that our culture doesn't become toxic and is a good culture is by continuing to take in a lot of feedback and listening to that feedback and changing the company and changing the culture to make sure it fits our growing number of employees. And lastly, so I'll end on this, I think this is a mistake that we made in the early days. We were so bent on growing the company and building a market that we felt that, and we cared so much about the company that we felt that everyone we hired cares just as much. And just because we're successful, that should be recognition enough. And that should be reward enough for our employees. But we realized in time, and this was based on feedback that we got over and over again, that actually giving people recognition is incredibly important. And we wanted to make sure that the recognition aligns with our values. So we have something called Value Awards that we give once a year. It used to be that we just picked everyone, and now we actually have other people vote and other people nominate others. So it's a lot more crowd-based. We do an employee recognition day, and we cook breakfast for everyone at branch. It's much harder now that we're over 100 people. I cooked a lot of bacon 2 months ago. And we try to give recognition. We have at all hands, everyone submits shout-outs, and then Alex, our CEO, reads the shout-outs. So that's something that as you think about culture and as you think about hiring and growing a team, start early. You can never give too much recognition to your employees. So that's it. Thank you. Good luck building your own cultures and scaling them. And last advice, start early. Thanks, guys.